I stood at the threshold of the house that once felt like home, feeling the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me. Crystal, my mother-in-law, had just insulted me, her words cutting deeper than any knife. "You're worthless now," she spat, her voice dripping with disdain. It wasn't the first time I'd heard her cruel remarks, but this felt different, more intense. I had just lost my father-in-law, Paul, a man I admired greatly. His death had left a void in my life, one that Crystal seemed eager to exploit. It was during this emotional turmoil that I made a decision. My name is Daisy, and I had to reclaim my strength. I was a 30-year-old office worker, having lost my parents in a tragic accident when I was young. I spent my childhood in an institution, never knowing the warmth of a family. Paul had entered my life like a beacon of hope when I was lost, offering me a job in his construction company and a chance to build a future. I had been grateful then, but now, as I faced Crystal's wrath, I realized how much I needed to stand up for myself. Paul was a generous man, deeply involved in charitable work, and it was through his kindness that I found a place in his family. I remembered the day he first approached me at the facility. "Why not work at our company?" he had suggested, his eyes filled with kindness. I had accepted his offer, grateful for a chance to escape my past. The other employees were welcoming, teaching me everything I needed to know. Over the years, I had become a valued member of the team, but all that seemed to mean little now. Growing up without parents had been difficult, but Paul's kindness filled the gap. He often brought his children, Alexander and Mona, to the facility. Alexander and I connected instantly. We shared quiet moments together, reading books and discussing our dreams. He had a fascination with foreign architecture, always talking about places he wanted to visit one day. Meanwhile, his sister Mona was the complete opposite, a spoiled child who rarely showed interest in anything other than her whims. The day Paul suggested I marry Alexander came as a shock. "You two would make a great couple," he had said, his excitement palpable. I had never seen Alexander in a romantic light, but the idea of building a life together began to take root. Our wedding was a modest affair, just family, but Crystal's disdain was palpable. "How embarrassing to introduce a woman with no family," she had whispered, making it clear I was an outsider. Despite the lack of fanfare, I was filled with hope. However, the shadows of Crystal and Mona loomed large. They never accepted me, often belittling my efforts and mocking me behind closed doors. My life soon became a balancing act, trying to keep the peace in a house where I felt increasingly unwelcome. After we married, I moved in, and Crystal decided we no longer needed a housekeeper. "Daisy will take care of everything," she declared with a dismissive wave. Anxiety gnawed at me. Managing a large house while working a full-time job was no small feat. I often found myself overwhelmed, but every time I voiced my concerns, Crystal and Mona laughed. Their disdain became a regular part of my life, and I learned to navigate their cruelty with quiet determination. Things took a turn when I returned home during a lunch break one day and stumbled upon a scene that shook me to my core. I had heard noises coming from my room, curious yet apprehensive. As I entered, I found Crystal and Mona rifling through my belongings, clothes strewn across the floor. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, my heart racing. They turned, surprise evident on their faces. "Don't scare us like that," Crystal snapped, her tone mocking. I was about to protest further when I noticed Mona holding a necklace I had purchased as a reward for myself. "That's mine," I exclaimed, reaching for it. But Mona smirked. "You bought it with the money you earned at our company, didn't you?" "So what's the problem?" I felt helpless as they laughed, their cruel taunts echoing in my ears. Despite the humiliation, I chose to keep this incident to myself. I didn't want to burden Alexander or Paul with my struggles, believing I could endure it alone. But my resolve began to crumble when Paul fell ill. He was diagnosed with cancer, and the news shattered me. He had always been my guiding light, and seeing him suffer was unbearable. His condition worsened rapidly, and during one of his last visits, he expressed his regret about Crystal and Mona's behavior. "They've lost their way," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. I felt a sense of sorrow for him, understanding how he must have felt watching his family fall apart. Despite their neglect, he remained steadfast, hoping they would one day recognize the value of hard work and integrity. As Paul's health declined, I witnessed the true nature of Crystal and Mona. They seemed indifferent to his suffering, frequently going out, leaving him to fend for himself. "Good thing he has life insurance," Crystal would say with a cold laugh, her focus solely on material gain. I felt a surge of anger at their callousness, yet I remained silent, respecting Paul's wish not to let our struggles affect him. Paul's final days were filled with moments of clarity and resolve. He gathered us all one last time, sharing his thoughts and hopes for the future. "Don't worry about me," he said, his eyes filled with determination. "I've made my choices, and I want you both to live your lives to the fullest." Those words echoed in my mind long after he passed, shaping my resolve. When the day came, Paul's passing felt surreal. It was as if the ground beneath me had shifted, leaving me adrift in a world without his guidance. Crystal and Mona arrived 5 hours late to the hospital, pretending to grieve, but their lack of genuine emotion was evident. I felt a deep sense of disgust for them, realizing they cared more about the inheritance than about the man who had just died. At the wake, Crystal wasted no time in revealing her true intentions. "Now, let's discuss the future," she declared, her tone chilling. "You're useless now, Daisy." Anger bubbled within me. "Disgusting," I shot back, feeling the weight of her words pressing down on me. But just as I was about to retort, Alexander stepped in, urging me to leave with him. "Let's go," he said, his voice low and filled with urgency. As we left the house, Crystal's mocking laughter followed us, but I felt a newfound determination rising within me. I had been pushed to my limits, and I was done being a pawn in their game. "I'm no longer Alexander's wife," I declared, feeling the power of those words wash over me. The divorce had been amicable, a realization that our marriage was never truly meant to be. We had grown up together more like siblings than spouses, and our connection had shifted over time. Alexander understood my decision, supporting me as I sought a new path. "You deserve happiness," he had told me, and I believed him. But now I stood at the crossroads of my life, ready to reclaim my power. Crystal's eyes widened in shock, and I could see the gears turning in her mind as I gathered my things. "What will you do now?" she sneered, but I brushed past her, feeling lighter with each step I took away from their toxicity. A week later, the will reading brought a storm of emotions. Crystal and Mona were shocked to see me there, despite their attempts to belittle me. "What are you doing here?" Crystal hissed, her face contorting in rage. The lawyer, a man who had known Paul for years, dismissed her objections. "Today, Daisy is here by the president's wishes. We will not entertain any further interruptions." The tension in the room was palpable as the lawyer began to read the will. Crystal and Mona exchanged worried glances, their expressions shifting from arrogance to fear. The contents of the will revealed Paul's true intentions, and their laughter faded into silence as they realized they were about to be denied what they had expected. "This is ridiculous," Crystal cried, disbelief flooding her voice. "It must be a mistake." But the lawyer remained firm, recounting how Paul had wished to leave them just enough money to learn the value of hard work. It was a painful lesson they had long avoided, and I felt a surge of satisfaction as I watched their expressions turn to shock. The amounts were far less than they had anticipated. Crystal would receive $10,000, while Alexander and Mona would only get $5,000 each. Their faces paled as the realization set in. "Work? That's impossible for me," Mona wailed, her facade of confidence crumbling. But I knew this was the moment they needed to face the consequences of their actions. Desperation set in, and the two began to brainstorm ways to salvage their situation. "We can sell this house," Crystal suggested, her voice trembling. "It's worth a fortune." But I interjected, "That's not possible. The house has already been sold to one of Paul's acquaintances." Their expressions twisted in panic, and I could see the weight of reality crashing down on them. With Paul gone, their safety net had been cut, and they had nowhere to turn. "Don't forget the insurance money," Crystal tried to cling to hope, but the lawyer's next words were a death knell. Daisy is the beneficiary, not you. The disbelief on their faces was priceless. You're a fraud, a worthless nobody, Crystal shouted, her mask slipping. But this time, I stood tall, refusing to cower. I earned every penny, and it's about time you learned to stand on your own 2 feet, I replied, my voice steady. The weight of my father-in-law's legacy lay heavy on my shoulders, and I was determined to honor his memory by breaking free from their shackles. As I walked out of the room, leaving Crystal and Mona to face their fate, I felt a sense of liberation wash over me. I was no longer the woman they had mocked. I had become a force to be reckoned with. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I was ready to confront them head-on, fueled by the strength of my choices. In the following weeks, I focused on rebuilding my life. I moved into a small apartment, feeling liberated from the constraints of my old life. Each day felt like a fresh start, a chance to rediscover who I was without the burden of Crystal and Mona's negativity. I enrolled in a design course, something I had always dreamed of pursuing but had put aside for the sake of my marriage. Slowly but surely, I began to flourish. I made new friends, people who shared my passions and ambitions. Together, we explored the city, laughing and creating memories that filled my heart with joy. I felt lighter, unburdened by the weight of my past, and I embraced the possibilities that lay ahead. Months passed, and the pain of my past began to fade. I found solace in my new pursuits, embracing the freedom I had fought so hard to attain. I often reflected on Paul's legacy, realizing that his belief in me had fueled my transformation. The lessons I learned from him became the foundation of my newfound strength. But the shadows of my former life still lingered. Crystal and Mona, ever the schemers, began to resurface in my thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that they would come back, seeking revenge for the humiliation they had faced. I braced myself, preparing for whatever might come my way. One evening, as I sat in my favorite cafe, I received a message that sent a chill down my spine. It was from Crystal, and the words were as threatening as they were unexpected. You think you've won? Just wait. You haven't seen the last of us. My heart raced as fear gripped me. I had expected their fury, but the reality of it felt daunting. Determined not to let fear dictate my life, I contacted the authorities, sharing the messages I had received. They assured me they would keep an eye on things, but I knew I had to remain vigilant. The thought of Crystal and Mona plotting against me fueled my resolve. I had come too far to let them pull me back into their world of deceit. Days turned into weeks, and I found strength in my community. Friends rallied around me, offering support and encouragement. They reminded me that I had already faced my demons and emerged victorious. Together, we plotted our next steps, seeking ways to build a brighter future. I started sharing my journey on social media, documenting my transformation and inspiring others to break free from toxic relationships. The response was overwhelming. People resonated with my story, sharing their struggles and triumphs. I began to see my experience as a beacon of hope for others trapped in similar situations. As my online presence grew, so did my confidence. I began to speak at local events, advocating for mental health and the importance of self-worth. I realized that my experience, once a source of shame, had transformed into a platform for change. Each story I shared empowered others to stand up for themselves, fostering a community of resilience. But the specter of Crystal and Mona loomed large in my mind. I knew they wouldn't stay silent forever. One evening, as I was leaving an event, I spotted them lurking in the shadows. Panic surged through me, but I took a deep breath and reminded myself of how far I had come. With my heart pounding, I approached them, feeling a mixture of fear and anger. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Crystal smirked, her arrogance shining through. "We're not done with you, Daisy. You've humiliated us, and we'll make sure you regret it." In that moment, I realized how far I had truly come. I was no longer the scared woman they had belittled. "I'm not afraid of you," I declared, my voice firm. Their faces twisted in disbelief, but I could see the flicker of uncertainty in their eyes. "This ends now," I continued, feeling the strength of my resolve. As I turned to walk away, I heard them hurl insults and threats, but their words no longer held power over me. I had fought hard for my freedom, and I wasn't about to let their darkness seep back into my life. Each step I took felt like a victory, a testament to my resilience. In the months that followed, I continued to thrive. The support from my community propelled me forward, and I poured my energy into creating a life I loved. My passion for design grew, and I eventually launched a small business, focusing on sustainable interior design. Each project felt like a piece of my heart being woven into the world. One day, as I stood in my newly opened studio, surrounded by vibrant colors and creativity, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had transformed my pain into purpose, and my journey had led me to this moment. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, but I was ready to face them head-on. With newfound clarity, I understood that my experience had shaped me into a stronger person. I was no longer defined by my past. I was a survivor, a warrior. My life had become a beautiful tapestry of resilience and strength, and I embraced each day with open arms. And so, as the sun set on a bright future, I felt a sense of hope for what lay ahead. I had reclaimed my power, and with every step, I moved closer to the life I had always dreamed of. Crystal and Mona were mere shadows of a past I had left behind, and I was finally free.